Mr. Gardner.
Red button, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Randy, for doing this. I would
Put the mic directly in front of you, please.
I would concur with the chairman's statement that the council putting forward these kinds of thoughts and approaches is really critical to raising the level of discussion and moving us forward.
Hold on just a moment. Is there any objection to lifting the roll call so Ms. Gray may add on this item? Seeing no objection, Ms. Gray, how do you wish to be recorded? As yes. Okay, let's put a hold on the rest of the votes. Okay.
I would offer three additions for your consideration. The first, I think, embedded in the conversation from some of the panelists was the concept of linkages. And I think that is clearly one of our hindrances right now. I know it's specifically an issue on Temperance Flat and sites, that the analysis of linkages and how storage contributes to fixing the delta, fixing a whole host of issues. Frankly, the Department of Water Resources and Reclamation, for a variety of reasons, are not doing that kind of linked analysis. You heard Todd suggest that the JPA is now doing it because DWR is not on Friant. Reclamation is apparently not doing it. We'll see when the document comes out. That's a really critical element for understanding how storage can really contribute. The institutional challenge in that is that we need the regions to step up, but we also need the statewide perspective that DWR and Reclamation offer. So somehow we have to work through that in the planning stage, and it's not currently working. And so I think there's something to consider there in how do we get that kind of integrated analysis, how do we fund it? And I think you've touched on some of those issues, but I think it's really a critical issue moving forward and getting off the dime, because we're not looking at it in the current frame of co-equal goals and how do we advance both water supply reliability and ecosystem restoration. The second sort of institutional suggestion I would recommend to add is more specific discussion of the performance objectives. And I think this is an area where you could start to articulate what do you mean by the co-equal goals. And let me give you a couple of examples. For example, in the San Joaquin Valley, they use about 4 million acre feet a year from the delta. So over 10 years, that's 40 million acre feet. Can we, in some way, challenge the San Joaquin Valley to identify storage approaches, whether it's big storage, small storage, groundwater storage, conjunctive use, but storage that would provide over 10 years 40 million acre feet of water, but in a way that reduces or eliminates the diversions from the delta in dry years. So framing it as a co-equal goal, we're providing water supply reliability, but we're doing it in a way that reduces the stress on the delta at the times when it's most stressed, which is in the dry years. Another example is the delta inflow. How can storage, and I don't have a number for this one, but articulating a target for increased inflow to the delta, again, to reduce conflicts in the delta for water quality, water supply reliability, ecosystem restoration, but set a target, a challenge to the upstream areas of how would we come up with, and I don't know what the number is, 1 million acre feet, 2 million acre feet, that would reduce the conflicts in the delta. The third is climate adaptation, which Mr. Shibatani certainly addressed. But I think there's a number there that's probably readily accessible of the anticipated loss of snowpack, and the challenge is, can we identify storage to offset that impact? So those are a couple of examples, but I think setting those performance objectives will focus the discussion on what are the benefits and can people come up with it. The third is institutional suggestion is really around the issue of certainty, or how do we get there. I think we've made progress on the funding side through the language in the bond and the work that the Water Commission is doing to articulate that when we get to funding, we think that up to 50% of the benefits of a project are public benefits, and we ought to articulate what those are, and projects ought to compete for that money. But we haven't addressed those issues further up in the pipeline. And I think particularly one way to address that is to specifically ask the Natural Resources Agency, and maybe more specifically the Department of Fish and Wildlife, to put together a team that would negotiate for those public benefits during the planning stage. So right now, the institutional structure is that we rely on a regulatory process and permitting, which creates an incredible uncertainty fairly far down in the planning process. And so we have this dynamic where we want water users to plan storage because they're advocates for storage. But the approach of planning is more sort of the bring me a rock approach. Of bring me some storage with public benefits and I'll see if I like it. And if I don't like it, go back to the drawing board. And so we've been going back to the drawing board for 15 years now. I think a more effective institutional dynamic would be that the state, and we could figure out what those entities are, but the state puts together a team that is involved in the planning, and their specific purpose is to be the advocates for the public benefits portion in the planning stage. And I think it's particularly important on the ecosystem restoration side to move those entities towards direct involvement in planning and preparing storage plans. So those are some institutional suggestions for you. Thank you.
Mr. Gardner, you also put in a separate request to talk about something else, but I don't know what it is.
When you get to public comment.
You ought to do it right now, because right after this we're going to go to the discussion of the holdover item from yesterday, and that's it. So this is Mr. Gardner on item 18, public comments. Yes, sir.
So I wanted to touch on a couple of the other items that I mentioned in the implementation committee, actions moving forward. More specifically on the performance measures issue. I've been trying to watch that and what's happening with it, and the continued message from.
Wait a minute. Let's I just forgot one thing. We have a motion on the table that Mr. Nordhoff has made on Randy's stuff. Ms. Gray asked to record a vote before she left, and we opened it for that purpose. Let's conclude that issue. Nobody else had requested to speak. Starting with Mr. Nordhoff.
Nordhoff, aye.
Johnston, aye.
Fiorini, aye. Eisenberg, aye. Okay. There you go. That's passed. Thank you. I'm sorry, Mr. Gardner.
So the message on performance measures continues to, and the language continues to be, we're thinking about it. We have the interim performance measures. We don't really like them, but we hope to have some work on them. Just listening in yesterday on the ecosystem, the word hope, I think, was 2 or 3 times in the conversation. That it is not an acceptable approach. And Mr. Chairman, I know in July you specifically expressed, I think, some frustration around the lack of performance measures and said, can't we come up with something to get started? And I don't think I've seen any action since then on that issue. And I'm going to keep raising it because I think it really
I encourage you to keep raising it, but I know of no particulars on that subject. Mr. Knott?
As per the discussion we had yesterday, it starts to be a fairly tricky subject, and we have interim measures in place right now, and we are starting the development of a more complex system. One of the things I've done with Mr. Gardner is invite them to participate in the creation of some performance measures, and we're going to pursue that. I do think that the goal of a good performance measure is something that is succinct, captures the core idea or thing that you're trying to measure, And whenever you're trying to do that, especially on outcomes, which are the most difficult thing to get, it really becomes problematical in finding the data that's available to do that or creating that data. But it's still something that we have to do, and it's something we're dedicated to actually achieving. So yes, we'd like to involve Delta Vision into that, as well as other people that are interested.
And of course, on the particular issue of ecosystem restoration, we have pretty clear performance measures now. The 8,000 acres of tidal marsh restoration and the 12 to 15,000 acres of floodplain restoration in the Olo bypass that we're trying to pursue today. The real challenge is can we attain that level of output? And we've spent 7 years developing a very complex set of ecosystem restoration performance measures in the BDCP that have targets by time period as well as outcome performance measures.
Here's the thing that strikes me. There's so much going on, and there's so much volume of paper and studies and research and plans and everything else that no rational human being can find at a single place at a single time something that says, are you doing good or are you not doing good? And I keep going back to the most simple of measures to start. We've got, 30 plus years of troll and something else delta data on salmon and smelt. It comes in all the time, and not good news, and it's certainly not a perfect reflection of what the ecosystem is in general, but it is something that's mucked around for all that time. Start there. Put it up on the web page. Red, yellow, green, do a stop. I don't care what you do, but just start with one. And let's say for the Stewardship Council, it is progress on achieving 8,000 acres of land rehabilitation or protected status within an X year period. Put it up on the board so that on our website, so that when everybody opens the scene, they say, gosh, this is what they think is going to be their first measure of success or failure. Now, we can't condemn the property. We don't buy the land, all that stuff. I understand the risks of doing it, but that is the measure. Those are the measures. So my only concern, as I have said now for going on 4 years, is start somewhere. It can't be possible to say there are no understandable measures in water, the delta, public policy, or financing, except we have completed a report on a date. That can't be the only, and that's why performance and outcome predictions are so hard. Everyone gets to say whatever they want, and we have 80 items in the Delta plan that are outcome measures, kind of, sort of. I thought it was too many to begin with, but everybody seemed to like it. It takes 2 years to 3 years to develop. I don't believe it. It's got to be better than that. How about it takes 4 weeks to develop one performance measure in January 2014, which will be posted and maintained in a prominent location on our website thereafter. I don't even care what it is. Maybe it's rain. Lots. Not as much as we want. None. I don't care. This is where everybody wants all questions answered in advance. When progress comes by defining a goal and putting it out there and taking the risk by public exposure of the goal and saying, boy, things aren't happening. That's why performance measures are not just the performance of the agency, they are the agency's view of the performance of others. And I understand that is a mean, nasty, but you put out your report card. Yep. You give us a C- or a B+ or whatever we get this year, and everybody grumps if they get a low grade and preens themselves if they get a high grade, but the fact is that they pay a modest amount of attention. Anyway.
Or they don't talk to me anymore.
Right. Keep pushing.
Yeah, and we suggested 6 or 7 based on some preliminary work with stakeholders in the spring on identifying, and there's actually remarkable unanimity on that these are the things that we really could start to measure. I also wanted to just touch on the levy investment strategy. That too remains a continuing frustration. I've listened in on the October conversation, and the fact that we're at a place where just negotiating an interagency agreement is going to take 9 to 12 months before we start doing the work, there's something wrong. And my overall sense is that there is not a sense of urgency. And maybe this is a good example of where escalation would really help, is that if we're working at the staff level and the answer is that legal has to look at it for 60 days, that's time to go talk to the director and say, let's get this done. And and I think in the August meeting, which I wasn't able to attend, I think, Mr. Chairman, you noted that the plan at that time did not lay out a strategy of getting you to the January 1st, 2015 date and having a strategy. And I didn't see in the October meeting in fact, I saw less clarity of what the plan was, and what I saw was we don't even have the interagency agreement until January at the earliest. And I can't imagine how you have a work plan that gets you to do all the things that are outlined in the in getting to the strategy by January 1st, 2015, if you're not, you may not even have an interagency agreement until March of 2014. So,
Mr. Nordhoff, did you want to weigh in on this point?
Couple of things, and I agree with you, Chuck, particularly on the levies. I don't think we have the proper sense of urgency on that. We had a discussion this morning, and I think you will see us moving expeditiously and smartly on that very soon. And I just wanted to make another comment. I don't know if this is the appropriate time, or even whether I'm entitled to it because I wasn't at the meeting yesterday. But in reading the Delta Independent Science Board report, it just seemed a little bit sloppy to me. We talk about plans rather than objectives, and looking at water quality and monitoring this and monitoring that, and then time permitting, doing some other stuff. And I'd love to see a more rigorous timeline, with objectives, much like individuals have. I think the board should have one too, and prioritize. We're going to do this, that, and the other thing. Now, not all action, but I think a lot of it is. And that's the nice thing about the levies. Many things we have to do in concert with a lot of other agencies, too numerous to mention right now. But the levy prioritization, I think we can do pretty much on our own.
I would totally agree. I think the legislature asked you to do it in coordination with the flood board for a reason. I was going to bring a report from 1983 that basically laid out that DWR was going to do a levies plan. And 30 years later, we still don't have one. An interesting aside in that report is that there's legislation. They have a one-page summary of legislation, and 3 of the bills that were pending were sponsored by Chairman Eisenberg. So I know you've been involved in this issue for a long time and frustrated as well with how...
Chuck, look, this is a question where public preferences conflict with the availability of funds, and it's always been the case that most agencies don't really like to say, no, it's not the state responsibility to provide 100% protection for everybody who chooses to live in high-risk areas, regardless of circumstance. And therefore, since the state's not ever willing to say that, it's also hidden from having an honest discussion on what you do with risk in high-risk areas like the Delta, where the protection will never be perfect and barely might be adequate in some cases. And nobody seems to want to pay for the higher cost, although they very much want to have a higher level of protection. Well, that's relatively simple to state, but it is deeply controversial. So, anyway.
Yeah.
Thank you.
The difference is that there is money available now. There has been in the bond, and that lack of transparency and clarity is resulting in just frittering that money away in more studies and analysis, and not actually getting the work done.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.